The full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine is now well into its third year, and it continues to be one of the most defining geopolitical events of our time. What began on February 24, 2022, was actually an escalation of a conflict that had been simmering since 2014, with the annexation of Crimea and the fighting in the Donbas region. Today, the situation is more complex than ever, a multi-layered struggle fought on battlefields, in diplomatic chambers, and in the minds of people around the world. Let's break down where things stand right now. Militarily, the war is a relentless grind. We're seeing intense battles along sprawling front lines. The nature of this warfare is constantly evolving. It's a hybrid war, blending traditional trench combat, reminiscent of past centuries, with the most advanced technology of the 21st century. Drones are everywhere, providing constant surveillance and striking with deadly precision. We've seen Russia deploy advanced weaponry like hypersonic missiles in massive aerial bombardments, targeting critical infrastructure in cities far from the front. Ukraine, in turn, has leveraged its own ingenuity and Western-supplied systems to defend its skies and launch counterattacks, sometimes hitting targets deep within Russian-controlled territory. The front lines shift, sometimes only by a few hundred meters after weeks of brutal fighting, highlighting the costly, attritional nature of this war. Neither side has been able to land a decisive, knockout blow, leading to a protracted struggle that tests the endurance of both armies and societies. But this isn't just a story of military hardware and strategy. It's a profoundly human story. The humanitarian crisis is staggering. The United Nations reports that millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. Some are internally displaced, seeking safety in other parts of the country, while millions more have become refugees abroad, creating one of the largest and fastest displacement crises in modern history. For those who remain, daily life is a constant challenge, marked by air raid sirens, power outages, and the psychological toll of living under the constant threat of attack. The war has left deep scars on the landscape and on the people, with entire cities reduced to rubble and countless lives forever changed. Beyond the immediate theater of war, the conflict's ripples are felt across the globe. Economically, the disruptions have been significant. Before the war, Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of Europe. The conflict has severely impacted global grain and sunflower oil supplies, contributing to food price inflation worldwide. Energy markets have also been thrown into turmoil. Europe's heavy reliance on Russian gas and oil was exposed, forcing a rapid and painful pivot towards alternative energy sources and suppliers. These economic shockwaves have affected supply chains, driven up inflation, and impacted household budgets in countries thousands of miles away from the fighting. Diplomatically, the war has redrawn the geopolitical map. It triggered a historic expansion of NATO, with Finland and Sweden abandoning decades of neutrality to join the military alliance. This has fundamentally altered the security architecture of Europe. Western nations, led by the United States and the European Union, have responded with unprecedented sanctions against Russia, aiming to cripple its war economy. They've also provided vast amounts of military, financial, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. This has created a clear dividing line, with a coalition of democracies supporting Ukraine against Russia, which has sought closer ties with other nations like China and Iran. This global polarization is a defining feature of the current international landscape. So, the big question on everyone's mind is, how does this end? The path to peace is incredibly complex and fraught with obstacles. On one hand, you have the military reality. Both sides still seem to believe they can achieve their objectives on the battlefield, or at least improve their position for any future negotiations. Ukraine is fighting for its very existence, its sovereignty, and the liberation of all its territories. Russia, on the other hand, has stated goals that are difficult to reconcile with Ukraine's position. This fundamental clash of objectives makes a simple, quick resolution highly unlikely. On the other hand, diplomatic efforts are always happening, even if they're not always in the public eye. Various countries and international bodies have proposed peace plans and offered to mediate. We hear talk of peace summits and back-channel communications. These discussions often revolve around difficult questions. What would security guarantees for Ukraine look like? What would be the status of the territories currently occupied by Russia? How would accountability for alleged war crimes be handled? Finding answers that are acceptable to both Kyiv and Moscow is a monumental challenge. Public opinion also plays a crucial role. In Ukraine, there is overwhelming support for continuing the fight to restore the country's 1991 borders. The national identity has been forged in the fire of this resistance, and there is little public appetite for concessions that would reward the invasion. In Russia, the situation is more opaque. But reports and some polling suggest a weariness with the conflict, with a significant portion of the population hoping for an end to the special military operation, sooner rather than later. However, public opinion in Russia is heavily shaped by state-controlled media, making it difficult to gauge its true impact on Kremlin decision-making. As we look ahead, a few key factors will shape the trajectory of this war. First, the flow of Western military aid to Ukraine is critical. The consistency and scale of this support will directly impact Ukraine's ability to defend itself and potentially launch new offensives. Any wavering in this support could have immediate consequences on the battlefield. Second, the resilience of the Russian economy in the face of sanctions is another key variable. Can Russia sustain its war machine over the long term, or will the economic pressure eventually force a change in strategy? Third, the political will in Kyiv, Moscow, and Western capitals will be constantly tested. As the war drags on, maintaining unity, morale, and a coherent strategy becomes increasingly challenging for all parties involved. In summary, the Russia-Ukraine war has entered a phase of protracted conflict. The fighting on the ground is intense and attritional, the humanitarian costs are immense, and the global repercussions are far. While the desire for peace is universal, the path to achieving it is narrow and filled with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The coming months will likely see a continued interplay of fierce military engagements, complex diplomatic maneuvering, and the unwavering resilience of the Ukrainian people. This remains the most significant security challenge of our generation, and its outcome will shape the world for decades to come. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis helpful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more in-depth content on global affairs. Stay informed and stay safe.